Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel this evening. I'm so glad you've joined me, and loads of love to you wherever you are in the world. And I hope you're doing remarkably well and keeping lovely and cozy and warm with the freezing weather out there. And let me know what the temperatures are where you are living in the world, because some of us are very cold indeed. And if you're living in a part of the world where it's very hot, let us know what the temperatures are there. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners. Please, Dad, said my brother Ethan, we just need $50,000 to start up our business. Please give us this loan. We need to brand ourselves. We have to advertise our services and buy a plethora of cleaning equipment to go and clean people's fish tanks for a living. We need a van with our company logo on it. There's a lot of money to be made in this business, I promise you. They're very wealthy people out there, Dad, who don't have time to clean out their fish tanks. There are people that have tanks with delicate ocean fish that need to be carefully managed. I'm sorry, son, but I'm not about to throw $50,000 down the drain with one of your harebrained schemes. Why don't you put your proposition to the bank and see how they feel about it? Go and visit the bank manager. I don't want to be involved. My poor brother Ethan looked like a deflated, punctured beach ball that had lost all its va-va-voom. So I intervened on my brother's behalf, as my intransigent, stubborn father was much more inclined to listen to me. I was the one that was more proficient in putting up a reasonable, acquiescent argument. I'd been head of the debating team when I was at school, so if anyone could make my intractable, headstrong father see objective reasoning, it was certainly me. The trouble was my willful father was not always a very easily persuadable man. Dad, this isn't a fly-by-night harebrained scheme, I promise you that. This is the quintessential opportunity for me and Ethan to run a successful business together. You've seen how our fish tanks have flourished over the years and been the envy of everybody we know. A lot of people, Dad, they don't know how to keep fish. Fish will suddenly spontaneously die on them. Sometimes it's due to extremes of temperature, high ammonia levels, nitrate levels, dropsy, overcrowding, internal parasites, and of course the biggie, stress. But me and Ethan, we know all this stuff. There are businesses out there, Father, hotels and restaurants with fish tanks and koi ponds that need perfect managing. We would be so brilliant for the job, absolutely brilliant, and besides anything else, it will pay so well. If you'd like, we'd give you a share of the profits. Please loan us the money. Dad, we would be ever so grateful. My father physically frowned. I knew that mulish, uncompliant, stiff-necked expression he was wearing on his face all too well. I was rather familiar with it. It didn't bode well for me and Ethan. I could see the writing on the wall for us already. Regretfully, my orthodox, ultra-conservative father was exceedingly old school, rigid in his thinking and ideas. So for him, the likes of cleaning a fish tank for a living was indeed an outrageous prospect. In my father's day, a fish tank would have been a fallacious luxury for the very frivolously rich, who had nothing better to do with their time, or for the occasional youngster keeping a goldfish in a bowl as a pet. But investing in a business like ours was to my father like blowing caution to the wind. I will admit some of the other fly-by-night ideas for businesses that my brother and I had flopped dreadfully, so I suppose I couldn't be too surprised to see my unmalleable father deeply cynical about any of our impulsive business ideas that he thought would go awry. Why could my father not comprehend that this time things were incredibly different? This was not pie in the sky, nor was it a pipe dream, but a quintessential opportunity to grow a business. But my uncompromising father was not biting the bait. He seemed to refuse to budge, like a bull terrier not giving up on his bone in a hurry. The annoying thing about it all was my father was one of those wealthy, tenacious, implacable men who was shrewd with his money, and took a consummate smug satisfaction watching his bank balance steadily grow. My father was always frugal, so it took exigeant negotiation to get him to buy anything, even when it came to furnishing our own home. It took my mother an entire year to finally sweet-talk my father to revamp the kitchen and to upgrade it. I remember he wasn't eager to part with a penny of his money, until my mother brought a real estate agent over to our home to persuade him that adding a pristine kitchen would significantly add to the value of our property. It possibly wouldn't surprise you to know that my father was a banker at one of America's well-known banks, but I'd rather not say which one it was. He was an accomplished businessman, a competent negotiator. Sometimes I think he saw the world all in numbers. He was the kind of person that would be able to figure out a complicated, convoluted mathematical equation in seconds, while the rest of us would need to pull out our calculators. People would look at my father in wonder and say, "How did you do that, sir?" I think my poor father didn't understand why his mathematical genius had not been inherited by his two sons, who seemed to have effaciously bypassed this illustrious maestro gene. Something that disappointed him greatly, for he would have indeed appreciated a son who shared his passion for mathematical equations. My father would have loved nothing better for his two sons to be involved in a decent job that requires wearing a smart blue suit, a tie and black shoes, and sauntering off to a regular office job every day of the week with a briefcase in hand, looking every part the quintessential sagacious businessman, earning a regular salary and getting all the benefits like retirement and health cover. This was my father's idea of a decent, proper job. My brother and I had chosen not to go to university, although we did acquire the grades. This decision on our parts had not gone down well with my dad, who felt that you could only be accomplished in life with degrees behind your name. He couldn't comprehend that it was possible to triumph in life without one. I remember one year at the school fete we'd entered a competition where there was a large bottle of Smarties, or chocolate sweets if you like, in a big bottle. You had to guess how many chocolates were in that bottle. No surprises for guessing who won that competition. My father, of course. I remember he looked at the bottle, shook it a little, and said, "There's 10,280 Smarties in here. Give or say 1 or 2. Imagine our amazement to discover that the exact amount of Smarties was 10,301. My father was exceedingly close. My mother, on hearing our conversation with my dad, asking him for a loan, graciously intervened on our behalf. She was very good like that, but my father could be as stubborn as a mule, and once he said no, it pretty much put a nail in the coffin for us. We would watch our dreams go flying out the window like a hot air balloon on the wind, or a firework cracker shooting up in the sky on the 4th of July. "Please, sweetheart, we can afford to give our children this money, surely. And I think their idea is wonderfully ingenious, don't you? You know how brilliant Ethan and Kevin are, especially with taking care of fish. Their tanks are always pristine. I don't see why their business wouldn't take off and really succeed. You're their father. The least you could do is back them up." "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I'm not about to throw caution to the wind. I'm a businessman. I will only invest in their business when they start to make money and prove themselves to me." "I'm sorry, darling, but that's completely ridiculous. Surely you know it is. You need money to make money for virtually every job. You're the one that's always telling me that in the first place. How can our two boys run a successful business without the tools they need to succeed? It all goes hand in hand, surely." "It's simple," said my father. "They need to work for the money, build up the cash, then they can create a business of their own. When I was a young boy, that was how things worked. Nobody expected handouts. If they wanted something, they worked hard to acquire it. These days, the mentality of the young is to give it to me. I'll pay you back later. I'm sorry, but I have to put my foot down. So no is no, and that is final." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," said my mother. "I tried my best to speak to your father. I really did, but he's not budging, I'm afraid. Maybe your next option is to apply for a bank loan." I felt quite upbeat the day me and my brother went to apply for that bank loan with our business plans in our hands. We both looked every part the businessman, in our pinstripe suits, white cotton shirts and shining black shoes. Even my father looked impressed when he saw us kitted out to the nines for this interview. The object was to persuade the bank to loan us this money. I was suddenly feeling quite positive. I had acquired a list of people's names who were eager to use our services in the future when we started our business, But my heart sank when we arrived at the bank, and we found ourselves sitting opposite the most stuffy man that I've ever met. I thought my father was as unyielding as a brick wall, but this man was like the Great Wall of China. It would take bulldozers and major machinery to break this man down and get him to agree to give us a loan. My brother gave me a fleeting, disparaging glance as the short man with the bottle glasses and the receding hairline began to sit down and go through the paperwork. At first he did shake our hands, I'll give him that. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he said in a brisk, apathetic manner. I tried to smile at the man, I really did, but I don't think he'd smiled a day in his life. He wore on his face a fixed, indifferent expression, as I began trying to persuade him as to why the bank should lend us money for our inspiring business idea. He raised a cynical brow and physically frowned, much like my father had done. "Do you really believe there is money to be raised in cleaning fish tanks for a living? I don't see it myself somehow. Why, I don't even have a single friend who keeps a fish tank." My heart sank. I could feel my confidence soaring out the window. I tried to grab it back and to retrieve it, to keep my attention focused on our business proposal. But I could feel my enthusiasm waning, losing its momentum as I perceived the loan manager's scathing energy towards me. There's nothing as demoralizing as someone's indifferent attitude when you're telling them something you think has huge potential. You find yourself talking to someone who's staring at you with glazed eyes, who looks bored out of their skull. I truly think the manager would find staring at a shopping list infinitely more preferable and interesting than listening to me prattle on. "But, sir," I reminded him, "your bank is always actively encouraging young entrepreneurs to acquire loans from you. This is a foolproof business, I can assure you. We keep getting leaflets dropped through our door, encouraging us to take up loans from your bank, I might add." The man frowned. "A foolproof business idea," he said cynically. "I don't think so. It's in my interest to see whether I think your idea has the potential to make money for the bank. I'm sorry you've given me no reason to believe that this business of yours could ever flourish. I'm representing the bank's interest when I select entrepreneurs who have a greater prospect of achieving success than you do. I've given you the names of people that already want to hire our services, so does that not prove to you that there is a market out there for our business?" I protested. "I'm sorry," said the loans manager, frowning. "Nothing you've said today has given me any reason to believe that this business idea of yours is sound." "Please, sir, you won't be disappointed if you invest in us. I promise you." "If I had a penny for every one that said that to me, I would be a very wealthy man indeed. I'm sorry, the bank is not prepared to lend you the money in this regard." "You know what, Mr. Bundith," I snapped. "Let me tell you something for nothing. When me and my brother make it big, I'll personally come to this bank and I'll rub your nose in our bank statements. You're stuffy and pompous, that's what you are. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you have all the answers, but you know what people like you have? You have so little imagination. You wouldn't see a business opportunity if it was staring you blazingly in the face like a bright light. You're far too afraid to even take a risk. You're so cautious. No one gets anywhere in life with your stuffy attitude. Thanks for nothing." The bank manager scowled. "I'm looking forward to having my nose rubbed in your bank statements, as you say. If you do as well as you claim you will, I'm sure the bank will reconsider giving you a loan." I could see that my indignant attitude had not ruffled his feathers at all. So I imagined he was used to irate customers as peeved off as I was in not acquiring a loan. My brother and I stormed out of the bank. We took refuge at the Milky Way, drinking double-thick chocolate milkshakes, eating waffles and ice cream, returning home feeling sick and bilious, with heads hanging low, tails between legs, feeling downcast and gloomy. "How did it go?" my mother asked us when we returned home. "How does it look it went?" I said sarcastically. "Read our faces, Mum. Do we look happy? No, we don't. Why won't anybody believe in us? That's what I want to know." "I believe in both of you," said my mother. "If I had the cash, I would invest in you. But I don't. And you know your father. He's not going to budge on this regard. Your father can be so stubborn and bull-headed sometimes. Getting money out of him is like extracting blood out of a stone. But you boys are ingenious. I'm in no doubt you'll come up with a way to raise the money." Our family lived in a delightful area in Douglas County, Denver, in a green leafy neighborhood. It was 1982. In those days, some of those open prairies and old-growth forests were still quite abundant in the 80s. These days, many of them have been transformed into pasture land and woodlands. Douglas County is a rural area, but when I was a young boy, it was infinitely more so. The homes in our street were situated directly opposite a little prairie that stretched out into a large forest. And for us as kids, this was the quintessential perfect playground where we would go exploring and hang out with some of the other local kids. All the houses on our street were set wide apart so that people had sizable back and front yards. Our home was built in the 80s, was relatively new for its day when my parents bought it, so it was modern. Nowadays it would be categorized as charming with oodles of vintage character. On the outside it was a symmetrical property, built from bricks as my father insisted on a home made from bricks. He had very little faith in wooden homes. It was painted in a very attractive buttercup yellow, with pale blue shutters and large white French windows, along with a grey slate roof. At a glance you would look at our home and say, "Now that's really pretty." Of course it helped that we had a great front and back yard, courtesy of my father, who always ensured that our yards looked as impeccable and orderly as the numbers on his bank balance. My mother was the one with the artistic flair and finesse. She brought a touch of savoir-faire to our yards, with so many colourful perennials that our home looked like an English country garden. People even said as much. On the inside of our home, my mother let her creative juices run wild. Our home was filled with the bright colours you find in Morocco, such as aquamarines, golds, oranges, reds, purples, pinks, blues and greens. After both my parents went to visit Marrakesh in Morocco, my mother transformed our home into the colours she'd seen there. She fitted our house with elaborate carved doors, kitchens and bathrooms with bright rustic colourful tiles. There was nothing wishy-washy or commonplace about our home. The colours and decor were jaw-droppingly attractive, so much so that many locals in our neighbourhood were less intimidated and became adventurous with their colour palettes, all due to my mother's inspirational influences. After the horrible bitter disappointment at the bank, me and my brother returned to our bedrooms at night, with hearts burdened by bitter disappointment, by minds heavily set on proceeding with our business plan nevertheless. But how were we going to make that happen when no one would believe in us? Later that night I found myself being woken up by my brother. He was shaking me excitedly. "I've got it! I know how we can get money for our business plan." "How?" I asked him. "We rob the jewellery store, don't we? Then we sell some of those diamonds we acquire. We should raise enough money that way. It can't be too hard to rob a jewellery store, surely." "But that's illegal. It's dishonest. We can't do that." "Well, have you got any better ideas, Kevin?" said my brother. "Frankly, I think it's a great idea. It's going to take forever to procure the income we need to start up our business. This is a perfect shortcut to acquire our goal." "But what if it goes horribly wrong?" I said. "We could end up in prison." "It's a question of handling things correctly. It's not rocket science. We go into the jewellery store at the end of the day, when things begin to quieten down. Most of the local shops are closing up for the night. We wear stockings over our faces, black clothes and gloves. We use Dad's revolver. We act tough and aggressive, like we really mean business. I'll do it. I'm a good actor. I'll even put on an English accent. I can play aggressive very well. Besides, I'm a lot bigger than you, so I'll be much more intimidating. We scare the manager, tie him up to a chair with rope. We break open the glass cabinets with a hammer, grab all the jewellery in a sports bag. We run out to the back of the shop, over the parking lot, into the forest. We will take the woodland trail there that leads to the prairie at the back of our home. We will come around the back way, hide the jewellery in the forest, return home to resume our daily activities. As far as Mum and Dad are concerned, we were at home all the time, for our cars will remain parked in the garage. No one will suspect a thing. The police will assume the robbers absconded in a car and fled. They won't think two people robbed a jeweller's and slipped into a forest. We can even shout, 'Run to the car now,' so that when the manager is questioned by the police, he will say they ran off in the car and drove away. It's called planting memories in people's minds, or the power of suggestion, and it works every time." "That's all well and good, but what if they're customers in the store at the time?" "Well, we'll have to tie them up then, won't we?" "Bro, I'm not sure your plan is foolproof." My brother raised a sceptical brow. "You're beginning to sound like that stuffy bank manager. Just think about it, Kevin. We'll be able to start up our business with the money we raise. The jeweller will have insurance. The only people out of cash will be the insurance companies. And let's face it, bro, those large companies screw people with their excessive premiums. All the giant corporations do, including the banks. They're the biggest thieves of all. People are completely clueless how much we are exploited by banks and corporations. The money we raise from that jewellers will be a drop in the ocean to them. It rarely will. So in the end, no one loses, but we gain." "Yes, but what about the shop manager? He might feel traumatised." "Don't be ridiculous, bro. I won't terrorise the man. I'll be civil to him, that's if he cooperates." I do not know why I agreed to this nonsensical idea. I was not nearly as courageous and carefree as my brother was. I had possibly inherited a wee bit of my father's cautionary tendencies, but me and my brother had a dream. We wanted it to come to fruition, and we were impatient for it to happen. My brother was absolutely right. The jewellery owner would get reimbursed. The only people to lose out would be the insurance company. And let's face it, those large corporations are as greedy as hell. My father was already complaining about how much his insurance premiums were going up. Jolene's account. I had been working at the jewellery store part-time. On this particular occasion I was helping the manager display some of the new diamond pieces of jewellery in the shop window that we had acquired. Business had been brisk all day. Several married couples had come in to buy engagement rings. It had been a fulfilling day, but now I was feeling tired, so we were getting ready to close up, when all of a sudden 2 men came thundering into the shop, both wearing stockings over their heads, so we couldn't see who they were. I got the distinct impression the men were young, possibly in their late teens or early 20s, but they spoke with very distinctive British accents, so they were not local. I knew at once we were being robbed, and provided that we cooperated with the burglars, I knew all would be well and good. The larger man with the stocking seemed more aggressive of the two. "You need to cooperate, mate, or you're dead. Do you understand?" My boss nodded. "I want all the jewellery." He grabbed my boss by the shoulders and put a revolver to his head. I'll never forget Mr. Hershey's expression. The poor man was absolutely terrified. "Take anything you want," he said, handing the keys of the cabinets to the men. "I have a wife and kids. Please, please don't hurt me." I was standing there like a gormless idiot, unable to react in any way, when the smaller of the stocking men saw me and said to me gently, "I hope you don't mind, ma'am, if I tie you up." I thought he seemed ever so polite for a burglar, but I obliged immediately. I sensed these stocking men were not hardened killers, but I wasn't prepared to take my chances, because you can never be sure about that. I could see Mr. Herschel was trembling with fear. The men worked fast, grabbing all the jewellery. They dashed out of the shop. One of the men said, "Get to the car now." We waited a good 15 minutes until a passing stranger saw that we were tied up and came to our rescue. By that time, calling the police was a little bit late in the day, but we did anyway. The robbers by then were long since gone. We had heard them driving away in their truck. All we could tell the police is that the burglars were young. They were from England, but by all accounts they had got away with a fortune. Needless to say, I was glad that me and my boss emerged from the incident reasonably unscathed, although we did both feel aggrieved about this robbery. Back to Kevin. I must admit, when we entered the jewellery shop, covered in our stockings, my adrenaline was already coursing through my veins. I couldn't be sure how things would pan out. Things could go terribly wrong. We could be arrested by the police. That was, of course, the worst-case scenario, and a very big fear for me that my brother did not share. He was a lot more confident about our success. We dashed into the shop. Ethan held up the revolver to the poor man's head. It didn't even contain any bullets, but he would never have known that. My brother's performance was excellent. He even scared me with his threatening words. "Cooperate or you will die. Do you understand?" He was absolutely brilliant. I'll give him that. I felt sorry for the jeweller, though. He looked terrified, fearing that he really would be shot in the head. Little did he know he was being robbed by a pair of harmless pussycats that would never have hurt a hair on his head. My brother had to act tough, and he did it well. It was so strange robbing this store. In truth, it felt like we were acting a part in a movie. I was almost expecting to hear the director say, "Cut! Cut!" It really was a buzz filling the bag with jewellery, rushing quickly out of the shop, through to the parking lot at the back, and then into the forest. This forest was indeed of a substantial size. It literally flanked a large area. We knew the path we would take that ultimately led to the prairie that was at the back of our property. Me and my brother continued to run, fueled by the adrenaline pumping through our veins, down the earthen path in the forest, where it was filled with a plethora of mixed trees, from Engelmans, spruces, Douglas firs, cottonwoods, bristle-toe pines, and white fir trees, many of them mature in years, others younger specimens, but they were green. The forest was magnificent. The floor was covered with ferns, wood sorrels, bleeding hearts, lily of the valley, miner's lettuce, and dwarf dogwoods, and many other wild creeping ground covers, while the large canopy above our heads gave us fleeting glances of the blue sky. The twinkling sunlight that filtered through the trees did so with a gentle, kind light, somewhat subdued by the shade. It was magically ethereal in its impression, as specks of this glittering light cast its pretty shadows on the flora and fauna. For a long time we never said a word, barely stopping to even draw breath. We continued to run. Finally we did stop. We took deep, grateful breaths, congratulating ourselves for a job very well done. But it would be in the days that followed that would determine if we got away with it or not, and that was the part that concerned us most. When we reached the wood grove that fringed the prairie, me and my brother went through the stash of jewellery we had gleaned, and it sparkled and glittered in the forest. It was magnificent. It felt as if we'd hit the jackpot, as this jewellery was worth a fortune. We were in no doubt about that. "I think we should leave the jewellery here in the forest just to be safe. We can come and collect it later this evening. We don't want to appear suspicious," my brother said. "Well, where are we going to hide it in here?" "Where?" I said, looking around the wood grove earnestly. "What about hiding it under Mr. Nosy Parker over there? He's our favourite rock. I'll try and lift him up a bit while you slip the bag under him. Then we can return home empty-handed, but we'll know where to find him tonight. It should be an easy find. No one will find our stash here." It seemed like a great idea to me. "Oh, there you are," said my mother. "I was looking for the two of you everywhere. Where have you been?" "We just went for a walk in the wood grove, that was all." "Something dreadful happened a while ago. I heard about it on the local radio a couple of minutes ago, actually. Can you believe it? The jeweller's was robbed. Cleaned out they were, stripped of all their jewels." "Really?" I said. "That's terrible. When did this happen?" "About an hour ago, I believe. By all accounts, the thugs that broke in were menacing. They were wearing stockings, exceedingly aggressive, according to the poor manager. Threatened to kill him, they did. They weren't local, though. Very distinguished English accents, I gather. They tied up the poor manager and his assistant with rope to a chair. It was only a while later a local heard their cries and went to investigate. It would seem those louts absconded in a truck. They could be anywhere by now. The poor jeweller was so traumatised, poor man. He said the men were excessively violent, that he was certain that the big lout was going to shoot him in the head. He kept begging for his life, but the men showed him little mercy. He believes it's a miracle he's alive." The shop assistant remained very calm, and she refused to comment, so she must be a very brave young lady. I mean, I ask you, what is the world coming to these days when you get men like that, with not a shred of human decency in their soul? It's one thing to rob a jeweller's, but terrifying the poor jeweller like that, it's just not acceptable. I think many of the locals will be terribly upset over this report." Me and my brother gave sideways glances towards each other, knowing full well that as far as robberies go, this was not one that you would consider violent by any manner of means. But perhaps the manager enjoyed exaggerating the story, for it maximised the publicity he received. It was interesting that the shop assistant failed to say anything, possibly because she knew that the boss was talking complete poppycock and was embarrassed for him. As you can imagine, over dinner that night, all our family could discuss was the atrocious robbery and the ghastly scoundrels that had stolen the jewellery. I realised if my mother ever found out her 2 sons were involved and responsible for this nefarious crime, she would possibly go into cardiac arrest. It would distress her that much. After my dinner, my brother informed me that he'd wake me up at midnight. We would slip out of the house to retrieve our ill-gotten gains. I couldn't wait.
I don't want to leave our stash under Mr. Nosy Parker, that nose-shaped rock, for too long, he said. We'll get it tonight, retrieve it, hide it in my bedroom. I've got an excellent place in mind for it. Then next week I'll try and find out how we can sell the stuff on the black market. It'll probably mean going out of state for a while.
I was surprised when I went to bed that night, as I relived the sequence of events we had been through. It gave me a strange thrill, because like anything that involves a dare, like jumping off a cliff with a parachute, it's exciting when you do something you get away with. I was awoken in the late night by my brother. I could hear the excited thrill in his voice.
It's time, he said, to retrieve our stash. I'm surprised you even got a wink of sleep, Kevin. I'm champing at the bit to get going. I can't wait to get my hands on the loot. I'm so excited. Imagine all those glittering diamonds.
Have you thought about where we're going to hide the jewels when we get them home? I said.
Yes, what do you take me for, Kevin? I thought it would be an excellent idea to hide them under a couple of the loose wooden panels that I have under my bed. What do you think about that idea?
Sounds good to me, I said. I'm just relieved that the really scary part for us is over. But I'll tell you this, I ain't going to be doing this again. That's the problem with most burglars. They get greedy, and then it blows up in their face. They end up locked away in prison for years. If we get away with this, we can count our blessings, bro. But I ain't going to be doing this again. Do you understand, Ethan?
I understand, bro. Now let's get cracking. Make sure you're as quiet as a church mouse. We don't want Dad to hear us. He could be a light sleeper. We don't want to raise their suspicions.
I knew it would possibly be a little chilly outdoors, but we were not going too far. Ostensibly, we were going to run across the small prairie, then enter the wood grove, and a few feet within the trees is a very conspicuous sculptural rock we always used to call Mr. Nosy Parker, as the rock was shaped like a huge man's nose. I quickly threw on a sweater, a pair of trousers and some walking boots, and me and my brother crept out of the sliding door on the back porch onto the wooden deck, down the steps, across the backyard, towards the open prairie. It was a tenebrous night, so thank God we were wearing headlamps. That's all I can say. There was a half moon that cast a few light shadows across the prairie. We could see tons of rabbits bounding and hopping around, eating the vegetation. We saw a lone red fox with a dead rabbit dangling from his mouth, like a dog's fluffy toy that's lost a bit of its stuffing. He glanced at us briefly, quickly dashing into the woods. It definitely felt chilly. It was a quiet, cold night, so I ran across the prairie to keep warm. It was kind of reassuring running through a field of rabbits with their big, bright brown eyes staring at us while they chewed the greenery. But it was when we reached the wood grove that things became infinitely more menacing. I couldn't fathom what it was, but a few deers quickly scuttled past us, almost brushing against us as they did, as if they were alarmed by something. They literally hightailed it across the prairie, so incredibly fast. I was awestruck. I wondered if they were hankering around in our backyard, for we often had deer visiting us during the night. It seemed as if they barely even noticed our presence, and didn't care about us at all, which was exceedingly odd. Then I saw about 6 raccoons darting through the woods at breakneck speed, dashing across the open prairie towards our backyard. And then the red fox we had seen only moments before, with the rabbit still tucked away in his jaws, running through the prairie. It rather reminded me of when you hear about elephants in Thailand sensing a tsunami on the horizon and dashing to higher ground as quickly as they can to escape the calamity, for the animals can sense disaster. It was as if some of the woodland animals were in a dreadful, frantic panic and running from something. But what? That was the bewildering thing. When I glanced back at the prairie, I also noticed the rabbits were just dashing into their burrows as if they too were terribly afraid of something. When you see animals behaving like this, you sense something is seriously off.
What are the animals running from?
I asked my brother anxiously.
You don't suppose a mountain lion is loitering around? Look, all the rabbits in the prairie have disappeared. The whole prairie is empty. Something's going on, Ethan. Don't you think we should have brought Dad's rifle, in case we end up encountering the cat? Look, there is no need to be so dramatic, Kevin. Oh, we need to get to Mr. Nosy Parker. We need to grab the bag under him and race back. It's not going to take us too long. So for goodness sake, get it together, bro. You're losing it. Yes, but if there's a mountain lion around, what if it starts stalking us, Ethan? Listen, Kevin, we're here now. Let's just get to Mr. Nosy Parker. Don't think about any cats. Don't think about mountain lions. Now, it's only going to take us a couple of minutes, so get a grip, bro.
I don't know, bro. I don't feel good about this, Ethan.
Something is seriously off. Stop overreacting, Kev. I've had just about enough of you. Everything is hunky-dory, trust me. You're letting your imagination run riot. Now get a move on, will you? You're walking like a sloth. You've just got such a downcast face. You look like you would scare a mountain lion anyway.
As we made our way through the edge of the woods, suddenly the crickets and frogs stopped chirping. Even the insects had gone unusually quiet. What the heck was going on? Now the hair on the back of my neck was standing up on edge in prickles. The tall vertical trees began to swagger and swing like inebriated drunks as the wind whistled through the trees. It was a baleful, wailing sound that was so spooky it was making my nerves lose their calm. My feet tremble with uncertainty and trepidation as I pressed my soles on the earthen floor, crunching leaf litter beneath my feet. I told myself to get a grip, for my far more courageous daredevil brother had very little patience with my overcautious tendencies. I followed my brother into the woods, slipping behind him in a surreptitious straight line. That was when we heard what appeared to be a strange snorting sound that I think rather reminded me of a hog, but a much more pronounced one that suggested that whatever was making this sound was considerably larger in size than a hog. My brother beckoned for us to hide behind a tree that overlooked Mr. Nosy Parker.
Something's there,
he said, putting his fingers to his lips, indicating for me to switch off my headlamp, which I did immediately. It was rarely airy without the light of our headlamps, but the moonlight shadows from the open canopy cast a cascading light over Mr. Nosy Parker, which was very fortunate. And that was when we saw him. Bear in mind, this was the 80s. Me and my brother had never heard of Bigfoot before, so our eyes seemed to grow stalks as we fixed our stare on the strange, anomalous, incongruous creature that was ferreting around Mr. Nosy Parker of all things. I realised he'd seen a piece of material sticking out from the bottom of the nose like stone. It must have been the fabric of our bag. I remember he picked up the stone as if it was as light as a feather. And this stone, Mr. Nosy Parker, is enormous. It took all our physical strength to lift up just a corner of the stone to hide our bag underneath. I was so shocked by the creature that I was beholding, and desperately trying to fathom what he could be. He looked like a human being covered in long flowing hair, only he was built like a gargantuan giant. He had a gable-shaped head, and overlong primate arms, and very powerful shoulders. This thing was easily over 8 foot tall, possibly 600 pounds or more. His body was powerful, built like a machine. He would have made a large man look ridiculously lanky and small by contrast. I think in that moment my fear of this creature was confiscated by abject astonishment and wondrous awe. It was like I was in a parallel universe, observing a mystical creature of legend, but this thing was very definitely real. It was then, after the creature had lifted up the stone, I realised he had his hand on the bag that contained all our stash from the jewellery robbery. Oh my God, I thought, as I watched him opening the bag, turning it upside down to empty out the contents. and all the diamond jewellery came flying and tumbling out of the bag onto the ground. This huge creature began to pick up the different pieces of jewellery and staring at the diamonds with an expression of absolute wonder on his human-like face. The creature kept going, "Ah! Ah!" And then he let out a few excited whoops, as if he'd won the jackpot. Whoop! Whoop! I think this creature must be like a magpie, I thought, because he loved everything that sparkled. He loved those jewels. We watched in astonishment as he gathered every single diamond that he could find on the floor, replacing it back into the bag. He looked around himself as if watching to see if anybody had seen him doing it, and then he glided away. It was then, as if by magic, the orchestra of crickets began to sing again. The rabbits bounded out of their burrows. The fox we'd seen earlier returned to the woods, minus the rabbit he'd been carrying in his jaws, which I imagined he must have recently devoured.
"What the hell was that?" said my brother.
"I don't know," I said, "but I'm not tackling that thing for our loot, that's for sure." So we returned home empty-handed, but so stunned by what we had seen that we were far too befuddled to be downcast by anything. To cut a very long story short, I'm glad to tell you that me and my brother never ever committed a robbery again, but no one in the town ever knew who the mysterious robbers were that broke into the jewellery store. By all accounts, there is a Bigfoot out there sitting on some expensive diamonds who is worth a bob or two, as now we know what the mysterious creature we saw was. Back then we didn't. 2 weeks after the robbery, my mother came into an inheritance from a distant relative. She didn't hesitate to give us the money we needed to start up our business. So against all the odds, our fish tank cleaning business flourished and boomed. We cleaned tanks for celebrities, wealthy clients, corporations, fancy restaurants, and kept getting letters from the bank willing to offer us massive loans. Isn't it so typical? They're willing to lend you money when you've got it, but when you're dead broke and you need their help, they don't give you any at all. It really makes you sick. I never did rub the bank manager's nose in our accomplishments, as I had threatened to do. I did make it up to the jewellery store, though, as they were fully compensated by the insurance company, but I told the manager I'd like to put a tropical fish tank into his store to attract clients for free, under the rule that we would put our names at the bottom of the tank in order to attract business for ourselves. In reality, it was me and my brother's way of making restitution to him. I started dating the manager's assistant in the shop, who I'd tied up in the robbery, and today we are now happily married. The manager claimed that our fish tank had literally tripled his sales figures, as people would come into the store to admire the fish tank and then spot a diamond necklace and a glass cabinet that they had to have. So in the end, everybody was a winner, but most especially the hairy man. My word of advice is to anyone, don't you ever do what we did. It's not worth the risk. We were lucky we never got caught. But these days, with all the CCTV cameras, you're very unlikely to get away with your crime, and you could end up serving time. We were lucky to get away with it, and we would never have resorted to such desperate measures if that stuffy bank manager might have put a little faith in us in the first place, but that was way too much to ask. All I can say is thank God we never got caught, and I would never in a million years do something so reckless again. But there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.